A call to order this meeting of the Joint Conceptual Workshop for the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the Franklin Municipal Planning Commission for February the 24th, 2022. We'll start off with a roll call, with a call to order. Commissioner Allen.
Present.
Commissioner Franks is not here yet. Commissioner Lindsay is here. Commissioner McLemore.
Present.
Commissioner Mann.
Here.
Commissioner Orr.
Here.
Alderman Peterson.
Here.
And Commissioner Williamson.
Here.
And Alderman Berger, not yet. Alderman Brown.
Here.
Alderman Potts.
Here.
Alderman Baggett.
Present.
Alderman Barnhill.
Present.
Alderman Blanton. Alderman Hanson.
Present.
And Mayor Moore.
Present.
Okay. Yes, Commissioner Franks, welcome. We have a full... Okay, accommodations have been made to ensure that the public is able to view the meeting. The public may view the workshop in the following ways. Watch the meeting on Franklin TV or the City of Franklin website. You can watch the live stream through the City of Franklin Facebook and YouTube accounts, or you can attend in person in the boardroom. And the public may also watch the meeting on the TV in the lobby. So, our first item tonight, item number 1, is the presentation and discussion of the 2021 Development Report. Staff?
Thank you very much. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Eric Connor. I'm a principal planner in the long-range portion of our planning department. You probably won't see me nearly as much as some of the other folks in current planning, but I am one of our long-range planners, and one of my job duties involves the creation of the annual development report as well as the presentation to all of you here in this first quarter of every year. So we're going to go through this. I'm just going to give you kind of a brief overview of what is actually in the development report, kind of highlight some key interesting portions of it that we found for 2021, as well as potentially answer any questions that may come up throughout it. So I'll kind of just ask questions or ask 4 questions every couple pages. If nothing comes up, great. And if anything comes up that you'd like to ask about, feel free to just shout out and I'll try to do my best to answer it. So. So obviously we just, list of who our aldermen are, our leaving aldermen, as well as our new aldermen, the annual letter from the mayor, the accomplishments that we identified as major accomplishments for 2021, obviously the new Mac Hatcher extension opening up, the new fire station number 7, as well as the unveiling of the United States Colored Troops soldier statue on the square. Every development report we put in a quick little city at a glance page. So if you're just looking for maybe some quick numbers, you can find them here at the beginning rather than having to comb through the report. But all these numbers are found throughout the report as well as with further information throughout. Our estimated population for 2021 being just over 86,000. We get this by calculating a population based on the different number of housing types that we have within our land use coding system database, the typical average household size for those housing types, and then multiplying that number by the estimated vacancy rates, again, for each different housing type to come up with an estimated population for each year. Franklin currently sits at just over 44 square miles, which is slightly larger than the city limits of Paris, France, which we found kind of interesting. Now, obviously, the Paris Metro significantly larger than Franklin's Metro, but for actual city limits, just a fun little tidbit. In 2021, we did annex a little bit over 660 acres into the city, the vast majority of that coming from the Poplar Farms PUD development and the Southvale PUD development. a little bit over 1,000 dwelling units were constructed in 2021. Just over 50% of those units were single-family homes. And currently on our books, we have 13,708 dwelling units that are approved that are yet to be built. 49% of those are apartments and 22% of those are townhomes or condos. So the significant sort of shift in approvals from single family to more of a mixed type of development. In 2021, just under 4,000 dwelling units were approved. And Berry Farms developments accounted for approximately 52% of those units. So the vast majority of those approvals did occur, in that sort of southern portion of town. We do have an existing housing stock of just over 37,000 units approximately. And that's all of the different housing units of all different types that currently exist and have certificates of occupancy here in the city. So that's where that number comes from. And then there were approximately 364,000 non-residential square feet approved by site plan, an additional 236,000 square feet of non-residential development as part of 4 different development plans as opposed to site plans. So that means they're were part of a PUD, basically, is the difference between a development plan and a site plan. But 2 of those 4 development plans resulted in a reduction of square footage, meaning they previously already had X amount of non-residential square feet approved for their PUD. They came back and were approved for a reduction in that amount. So there were 2 plans that gained non-residential square footage and 2 that reduced it. We only had 1 Envision Franklin plan amendment in 2021, and that was at the Short Farm, creating that agri-hood type of concept for the area, going from conservation subdivision to neighborhood mixed use. Again, approximately 660 acres zoned into the city or annexed into the city and therefore receiving new zoning districts, and approximately 500 acres of properties rezoned, whether that is gaining additional entitlements to their PUD, which you can see here with Cherokee and Chickasaw Place, increasing their PD zoning, or just a change from R1 to R2 or R1 to office residential, those types of things. But as far as residential approvals go, as I stated, just under 3,800 units approved. Some of those were lot consolidations resulting in a reduction of units. Some of those were predominantly apartments and condos, while some, such as Poplar Farms, were entirely single-family homes. So it really was a bigger mixture of unit types than what you see in the 2020 development reports, which were predominantly apartment approvals. This significantly had more of a mixed bag. And if you look throughout the report, you will notice some of these different asterisks. Those result when the entitlements are unsure of what exactly the unit type is going to be as how we review them here in the development report. So you can see in the different columns, we list house, duplex, townhomes, apartment, or condos. But in the Berry Farms Town Center revision, we know that 406 units were approved, but at this time, the developer is unsure whether they will be for rent or for sale. So ultimately, the structure and the form will be the same. It's just whether or not those units will end up becoming condos and for sale or for rent apartments. So we do have that situation here with this Berry Farms Town Center revision, as well as West Haven was approved with entitlements, and we're just not sure what those unit types are going to be until they're actually built. So, as far as non-residential approvals, this is where I was getting those numbers for the non-residential square footage approved, both in site plans here in the top. Does that show my mouse? Oh, it does. Great. The top table, or the development plans as part of PUDs here in the bottom table. Do we have any questions so far? Great. Guess I'm doing great. So this is the largest table in the development report. It's 3 pages long. This ultimately is how we sort of track which neighborhoods still have a lot of development that's going on, and which ones just have a few units left. And we do our best to try to keep this updated as much as we can with the different certificates of occupancy that are given throughout the year. So if you have an interest in a specific development, you can find it here on the left, see which year it was approved or which year the most recent revision was approved, like Berry Farms Town Center, the total number of units, how many units have been constructed so far, and then the remaining type of dwelling units that remain for that project. So as you can see here in 2020, one of the numbers that shifted into the numbers showing a lot more apartments was the Eastworks PUD. They have 1,624 units approved, 1,624 units remaining, and 1,615 of those are apartments. Where if you look to see, a different type of development, if we look at, Berry Farms, Chadwell Tract, that was just approved here in 2021. Again, no units have been built, and you can see the breakdown of type. Or if we're looking at the Firestone development, they had 10 units approved in 2018. We've tracked 9 being constructed. There's 1 remaining. So ultimately, when that one gets their CO or that one house gets built on that one remaining lot, we will ultimately take it off this table, and it will just become part of the larger sum that we track in another place. So as you can see here, on this table, total number of units approved, 22,282, with 8,574 of those being constructed so far, meaning there is a remaining tracking total of 13,708 total units that have been approved, but have not been built yet. Any questions on this table?
Got a question.
We're all the time comparing ourselves to other cities similar to ourselves, and that mix that you're describing as far as how many units have been approved but not constructed, how does that compare to some of our peer cities? You may not have that
I
off
do
the
not
top.
have an answer to that.
I
don't know
can't
if-
believe it,
if
Eric.
anybody else does.
I mean, maybe that's something that'd be kind of interesting to look at, because, that jumps out off the page.
Yeah, we can definitely look in to see if other cities similar to ourselves put out these types of annual reports and see if maybe we can figure out sort of where we stand as far as approvals versus how quickly things are getting built in town. I believe that's sort of the information you're looking for. Yeah, we can definitely look in to see if anybody around does a development report type of project
Maybe
like
some of
this.
the peer cities that we
Yeah.
compare ourselves to.
Definitely.
Mr. Mayor, I know Edsel Charles has a market graphic study presentation tomorrow at the Brentwood Library. I think it's open if anyone wants to come, but he's counting neighborhoods and lots and forecasting and with the 6 or 7 counties surrounding Nashville.
I have a question. What is the average delivery time on these from original approval to actual construction delivery with certificate of occupancy?
I'm not sure that we have a good answer for that. As you can see, some of the stuff on this table, Water's Edge was approved in 2013. There are a lot of projects on here that these dates ultimately shift because they go through so many different revisions. Southwinds Woodlands, revision 4. So obviously, the longer a project takes and the more that a project changes, the longer time it's going to end up being on this table. And as soon as it's done, we remove it. So it's a lot harder to track once things get removed off this table. So I'm not sure if we really have an average, it takes 5 years for a development to complete out because, again, not only do revisions change things, but the different types of housing units will change things. It's a whole lot easier to put up 1 apartment building or 2 apartment buildings than 600 single-family homes. So it really does vary. I'm not sure that we have an actual average, but unless, no. The shaking heads over there say, no, we don't. So, any other questions? No? Okay. So here we can see a more detailed breakdown of the existing housing dwelling unit types that we have here in the city of Franklin. 56% being that of single family, with apartments coming in second and overall at 23% of our total housing stock, followed by townhomes and condos at 12%. And just a quick little breakdown, pie chart wise, of what that looks like. We also have one of these tables for the approved housings, dwelling types that are not yet built. Here you can see a major shift, with 49% of the approved dwelling units being apartments, and single family only having 13%. So, and then 22% being townhomes and condos. So a major shift from what we currently have to what the development community has come forth with desire to build, and that ultimately has been approved, being a major shift from single-family homes to the approval of apartments, with townhomes and condos sitting right there, sort of in the in-between for both.
The one I'm looking at that was on the board view, on that slide reflects 13,663 dwelling units. You have 13,708.
I was going to mention that at the beginning, and I
Sorry.
forgot. We found 45 additional units that were in the 2020 report that didn't ultimately get onto the development, that 3-page table. So when I originally pulled all the numbers, it was based off of those 45 units not being in this table. As we noticed it, we made the updates. So if you followed the flipping book link, your information is correct, because that is what this is. But if you're looking at the original PDF that is in the agenda, then it will be those 45 units short. But the 13,708, or yeah, the 13,708 is the correct number, versus the 13,660, whatever.
Cool.
So,
Okay, thank you.
any other questions?
So I've seen a earlier presentation, there was one that talked about, we basically see this shift every other year almost. Single-family home goes up and apartments and condos go down, then apartments go up and then single-family goes down and all that. At the end of all of this, well, not the end, there was no end, but God, there's no end. But when you add these together, will be about a 50-50 split on single-family home and apartment condos. So how are we thinking about the next few years? Do we see
So, yeah, if we move
continued
into.
back and forth, or?
I think that the table you're referring to is this next one with the future build-out, which is everything that exists currently plus everything that was approved. So if the entire 3-page table tomorrow were to be totally completed, this is sort of what we would be looking at as far as the housing stock available within Franklin. Single-family homes comprise 45% of that total 51,000 dwelling units, with apartments sitting at 30%, followed by townhomes and condos at 14%. Now, again, this is a little bit off because of those West Haven units that we just don't know what they're going to be, as well as those Berry Farm units that we don't know if they'll be apartments or if they'll be townhome condos. So if you do look at this specific page over the years, we are seeing, that future build-out shift of fewer single-family homes, them just having a smaller market share. And that's sort of just what we're seeing the market do right now, and the development community as land prices go up.
it's just a change in the product that's coming forward to us.
I understand that's what's happening to us a little bit. I guess my question is, if all this was said and done and we're at that, probably an even split to maybe a little bit less on single-family home, what are we thinking we ought to be headed towards? Like, in other words, what's our long-range planning? What's our long-range thinking? How we ought to be thinking about the next 2,000 units that come through here? Should we be thinking about a trajectory that looks different than this, or follow the same path, or instead of just reacting to what's coming in front of us?
Yeah, and that is a question for all of us as staff, as well as you all as elected officials. Is this what we want to see when a project comes before you? Do you want to see condos? Do you want to see apartments? Do you want to see, developers start bringing forward more, diversified housing options rather than just single-family neighborhoods, whether it be additional townhomes or duplexes? It is just a conversation that us as staff and you as elected officials, we just need to have. And there's no clear, easy answer.
Sorry, I'll make a final comment on this is, there's probably what I'd love to see, and then there's probably what needs to happen based on population growth, where people are coming from, what they're looking for. And so I'm trying to take a little bit of the subjectiveness of my own thoughts and process and the people of Ward 2's thoughts and process, and really also apply some logic to, this is where we ought to be thinking that we need to be going, so.
So one of the, I don't think it's in the development report, but within the Envision Franklin plan, there is not an attachment, but there is a map within Envision Franklin that highlights the areas that we identified as being the major areas that we would likely see growth in, just based upon the availability of different infrastructural elements, whether we can serve them in a short-term basis, or if it's really just sort of a long-term growth area. I don't believe it's included in here, but one of the maps at the very back of this is you can see sort of where the approved residential developments are within the city of Franklin. The lighter green being areas that were approved, or developments that were approved in 2021, and the darker green being previously approved that are still under construction. So you can see that the vast majority of our larger neighborhoods that are still under development are here in the southern portion of town, in that Goose Creek area specifically as well. That is an area that we are focusing on and going through and studying and trying to figure out what is actually feasible there, what our infrastructure can potentially handle, and what the future of that area is likely going to look like. We are also seeing a lot of development pressure in this area, as well as interest in annexation. So we'll likely see the Goose Creek area change significantly over the next 20 years. A lot of that is going to be based upon the different infrastructure that we may or may not be able to get down there, and conversations that are currently being had with TDOT. So based upon those infrastructural elements, it may not be even feasible to put large developments down in that area. It may not be possible to actually even get apartments down there, despite what people want, just because the traffic isn't going to be able to be managed. So there are a lot of question marks currently, especially in that area, and how that will develop and the different types of housing products that will be available down there. So, some things we are able to plan for, but some things right now we're just not sure, and those major elements are going to have a major impact on the different types of housing developments that are coming online in the next 10 or 20 years, so.
Let me bring back some real history. I've been on the Planning Commission so long that I can remember when the policy or land use plan said that we would continue to have 80% single family. And so, but it's also interesting that I do remember that people on the Planning Commission would say, okay, well, now this particular thing, it doesn't have the 80/20, but it's good, so let's go ahead and approve it and everything. So, you know, a part of it has been, of course, what people who are building want to do, too. But honestly, that idea was an important idea back many, many years ago, to keep it majority, big-time, single-family.
Well, not only that, Commissioner Peterson, when this commission set, before we brought, and some aldermen also, before we brought Envision Franklin for a vote, we sat and we discussed a vision for the city of Franklin. And the whole concept of multifamily and apartments came up, and we talked about that we at that time talked about how it was important, single families in the city of Franklin, single family homes, it was important for our identity to maintain majority. We never set a percentage, I will give you that, of single family homes, but we did say that it was important for Franklin to be a majority single family community. And from that point to now, though, we have approved majority multifamily. Now, whether apartments was, at that time, it was deemed, and I've heard it through every meeting we've had, apartments have become, has become a dirty word. So we've cleaned it up, in my opinion, by saying, well, townhomes or condos. But when it comes down to it, a townhome and a condo is not a single family. It's not single family. So I'm just saying that, and I brought it up, and Lord knows it was like I dropped a bomb when I said, should we consider having a retreat? You know, and retreat still has, still an open door. We still have sunshine law. It doesn't violate any of that. But should we sit down jointly and discuss what is our vision? Is that not our job? What is our vision for the city of Franklin? What do we foresee? What do we want? Because we continually approve these things, and sure, they're not built yet, but someday they will be. But what do we? That is our job, in my opinion. And what do we foresee? That's something I think we should, because we continue to approve these for long. We won't need to set a vision. We're setting the vision as we approve these. Okay, I'll shut up. But anyway.
I'd like to say something.
Certainly, Jimmy.
The supply and demand certainly is triggering what Franklin seems to be tracking as well. And I think staff's done a great job trying to have a good balance. I see the trend on apartments continuing to rise, and that's because the old stock will eventually evaporate. And that was approved in 15, 16, 17, and back when we had a different tool in the toolbox, so to speak. We had the RX zoning. We had things like Simmons Ridge had 3.8 units per acre. We couldn't get it again today. Everything seems to be 1 unit per acre off the peripheral or layered off of the interstate. So we got a major problem, and that's what's inflated the value of the land and inflated the cost of housing today because of that single-family stock. It doesn't exist. But it seems like every time we come in to try to get an idea for a neighborhood, we don't have that regulations in the toolbox, so to speak, that shields the public. Shields the developer, or not developers, but the elected officials, so to speak, when we had it back in the day when we had RX zoning. So when I think regulations got a lot to do with it, but on the other hand, the infrastructure has got to be consistent and with the range plan. And I agree with Marcia that the retreat, I've asked about that as well for several months, and collaboratively we could do a great job by getting together at Franklin at the Eastern Plank, wherever you want to do it. But in the past, we would have those retreats, and we'd have the big easels, and we'd write down the concerns from each and every one of us, and how we would prioritize those ideas. But we have a real affordable housing problem. We all know that. But I see the trend moving. We may have 75% apartments in 2 years from now. So it's whatever we want to do, is what's important. I appreciate the facts, because that really tells us how we're trending.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
it speaks exactly to one thing that I think a lot of us, the new ones, campaigned on, but specifically I did on if you look at our Envision Franklin conservation subdivision, allows for the big houses, multifamily, and we're seeing those proposals come forward. Imline Acres being one of them, one of the first, or one of the, not one of the first, but one where we're seeing kind of the sentiment I think everyone is speaking to, which is the desire for more single family. And all the way out Mount Catcher to West Haven is conservation subdivision. And after this, we've got Brownland Farms at planning that you all will be considering. I think it's really imperative that if we don't get ahead of this, and not that the big houses in conservation subdivision are a bad thing necessarily, but some more parameters possibly to fit, I think, the desires of the commission and a board of mayor and aldermen, and quite frankly, the thousands of doors that I think we represent and that we knocked this last year, who said exactly what Commissioner Allen said, some of those sentiments that she spoke of. So I think it's important that, and I would ask that staff and those of you here would consider encouraging maybe a relook at that, or else we're going to be looking at this with every submission from applicants over the next year and a half, 2 years, and we'll be talking about the same thing if we don't get that conservation subdivision right, or more in line with the sentiments that I think I'm hearing here. We're going to, great presentation though. We went down a rabbit hole here. Didn't mean to, but all these are great topics, and I think this information is really, really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, my God, I'm
Others?
sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll go ahead and say, I think staff's done a great job putting all of this data together, and I appreciate that. And Commissioner Allen, I want to agree with you as well, because Ward 2 is where a lot of this is taking place right now. And as Alderman Baggett was just talking about, knocking on these doors, this is of great concern to the constituents in Ward 2, and I'd be in full support if we did have some type of a treat, whether it be at the location that Commissioner Frank spoke of or any other one. I think this is imperative right now. We're almost at a tipping point, and the numbers that you're presenting right now reflect that. And it's up to us to sit down and do it.
Others?
I think everybody's brought out some good points. We have talked about this in detail at some of our meetings when we had the last planning and the joint meeting with planning and BOMA at the Eastern Flank. The apartments were discussed at that point, and we were saying how important it was that we really need to get a handle on this. And recently, we've told developers as they come through that we'd like to see more. Well, not actually. I've said more for sale than rentals, but they're still multifamilies, so either way you go, it's still a lot. So I agree with Commissioner Allen that we do need to really sit down and spend some time, and we all just talk about it, and we need to decide what is a healthy rate of growth. We've asked this question, I've asked it for a few years. I'd like to know just what is a healthy rate of growth in our community. If we're going to try to, we're not trying to stop or halt growth, but we need to get some control and decide in our minds how much we want to grow as a city, because we're growing pretty fast. And I think we all have the same thoughts on this. We have the same concerns, but we've got to sit down and figure out how we can make it happen without saying, Franklin's not going to have any growth anymore. We're going to have to, people will start going, and they're already going to Lewisburg and all those places, which is good because they need growth in places like that. But we need to figure out what's healthy for our community.
And I'd like, because we did discuss it at length at the last workshop
We
that
did.
we had at the Eastern Flank
We did.
Battlefield, and a lot of that work was done toward Envision Franklin and then the crafting of that document. But we also talk about it every February. Every February when the development plan is presented, once again, it always becomes a topic of discussion. So it's because we once again, it's our one time during the year when we have those facts and figures placed blatantly in front of us, and we're like, oh man, how many apartments are we building? And so And so we always express the same kinds of concerns. I don't know, Vernon, I look down at you, Vernon, and I don't, I know that, I know nothing about the city of Boulder, Colorado, other than that I have visited it once at one time. But I knew at one time that Boulder had an issue with growth and how to control growth, and are there ways to allow appropriate growth without overwhelming the city and things like that. I don't know if there are other cities that might be good examples of, but maybe some things that we should consider going forward.
Well, first of all, the presentation Eric and the team put together regarding the development point highlights the comments that you've all made, and the reason for us to come back with you with some data comparing other communities and understanding more so the dynamics of what's happening in Middle Tennessee to see how we're going to grow and how we want to build our city. Because so often we get approached by people that are investing in the community, and we've talked about it. The people that buy the homes, the businesses that invest here build it. But it's our responsibility to set the framework to make sure that the quality of life that's here today is sustainable for future generations. And it's not all about today and now, it's about going forward, and that'll be the true test. Some of us won't be around here by the time we'll be able to measure that, but I hope you agree with what I'm saying and allow us to come back with you, because that is a very important discussion, and it helps us give direction to those that want to invest in our community. Hopefully that answers your
Yes.
question.
Please.
Yeah, I think it's valuable that we be deliberate about engaging in that kind of additional discussion. I know, and I think that many of us have a concern that apartments, and we go through that exercise where if someone presents a plan that shows mixed use with a big apartment unit on the front or whatever, that we always, can you make those condos so that they're for sale units? And that seems to be more palatable than an apartment unit. But it's about, having equity in your community.
That's it.
I own my home. I've lived here for 30 years. And so I have a vested interest in this community being successful and a great place to live, as opposed to an apartment complex perhaps that's filled with people that are more transient, that are here for a while, but then they're gone. So, Emily?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in a little bit to give some context on how we landed on some of the design concepts in Envision Franklin. And we are going to be engaging in an Envision Franklin update coming forward very soon. So this is a really good time to start talking and having these discussions, and we can definitely get together as we go into that process, another retreat where everyone can really focus on these issues. When you think about the apartments that have been approved, they are predominantly in the interstate corridor or in commercial areas. Envision Franklin really only supports multifamily in that mixed-use setting because of some of the comments we heard originally in the Envision Franklin process. So the chances that land would have gone to single family are very unlikely. It would have gone commercial, it would have gone office, it might not have done anything for a while if the market didn't, allow for it. So I don't think it's always a one or the other, single family or multifamily. And I think a lot of times it has to do with the context of the area where these are being proposed, and are they making a more walkable, livable city in the long run. I would argue not every project does, but because of where they are being proposed, and some of these plans are really good plans, I would argue that some of these are really going to increase the quality of life in Franklin over time. I think where we struggle is that the land remaining for single-family residential is just very limited. And as we annex more property, particularly in Goose Creek, we may see more land coming available to increase some of those numbers because we know the demand is there. So I just think it's really important for us to consider where certain housing types are being placed and where they make sense and where they don't. I definitely understand the conservation design concept comments. That's for sure something we want to look at. We've heard from the public. When we originally drafted Envision Franklin, there was such a large amount of property that went into conservation subdivision design concepts that there was a balancing act to make sure that while 50% open space had to be preserved, that there was a give and take on how you could get some additional units. And that was important at the time for the people participating in the process that we heard from and in the discussions we had. I think the climate has probably shifted and those discussions need to be had again. So I definitely welcome that conversation and we can see where that lands as we have more discussions on it. But I just kind of wanted to give a little context on some of those things.
Well, I didn't want to, my comments hopefully were not taken that this is a flawed plan, because I don't believe, I think things have changed. And I think it's been in practice. And I think that even some more guidance, like more specific guidance, I think would help, offset some from the start. So I don't want, hopefully my comments and emails were not taken as that it's a flawed plan. That's not, but I think we could just get more specific.
Well, if you come back here a year from now and we've got 75% apartments and you see what the trend is, then we're not doing our, it's a negative growth with single family and it's because of locations and various restrictions. We all are got enough sense to figure out the balance and how well that balance needs to be performed, but current trend, you see what's happening, and I just don't want another year to go by that we see these numbers increase.
You're gonna see when as Goose Creek develops, that's exactly what's gonna go there. But once we develop that out, then what's left? When you go east and west.
Well, you
those are
got
good areas
12,000
for
acres
single
in out the eastern side in the urban growth boundary. But the cost of running sewer is $18-20 million. So there is a solution, Goose Creek and towards Arrington to lighten it up, the restrictions on housing and density. But we let the citizens continue to say, well, not in my backyard, when they bought into a high-density neighborhood. I don't have the answers to it either, but I think the retreat's going to help.
Well, I think Emily brought up a good point about the Cool Springs area and, everything being near the interstate, those locations, it makes more sense, we've approved a lot of them in that area. Eric, what is the numbers that are left remaining, that are to be developed in the Cool Springs area, and what's been done so far?
Cool Springs specifically, if we look at this map,
Which one?
this is on page 20. I want to see if I can zoom in without, perfect. If we
Page
look
20?
in, page 20, yes.
Oh, my goodness.
So this is the approved residential development map. These are the developments that have been approved that are still under construction. Specifically, looking into the Cool Springs area, we have Eastworks, which was approved last year, which is approximately 1,600 apartments. And then depending on how far south you want to consider Cool Springs, that could be it. If you look a little bit further south, then we start including Ovation, Orium, and the West Franklin Park PUD, which was just approved last year. But everything north of McEwen, I guess McEwen Place Town Center, we could also include in there.
And Eric, I would add that just with Ovation, Avalon Square, West Franklin Park, Eastworks, Orium, those are where your biggest numbers of apartments are. So while they don't seem large on this map necessarily, they are the very high-density developments where the numbers of apartments that were approved are the highest.
Yeah.
So while it may be difficult to see that on the map, that's where the majority of the units for apartments are coming from.
Yeah, Eastworks threw the percentages off last year on approved units. It skewed them significantly because Eastworks itself was more than, I believe, the rest of the developments combined as far as total number of units. Or it was pretty comparable to the rest of them. So this in
Okay.
itself is a very, very large number of units, 1,600. And if we look at the total number of residential approved apartments is 6,600. So it's a quarter of those just in and itself.
6,600, wow.
Okay.
Well, just like Jimmy said, they're market-driven, so they don't have a lot of vacancies. So we're saying that we know that the community wants them. People are moving here in droves, so we have to be BOMA has to be the one to dictate whether we're going to have more apartments or not. Because they're going to keep coming, just like you said. They're going to be continuing to be built, and people are going to be renting. So
Andrew,
it's going to be a
Andrew
tough
and
thing.
I did reach out to our multifamily communities last year around this time. And I believe the average vacancy rate for our apartments in town was about 98%.
That's what I'm saying. So how do you fix that?
And while the vacancy rate is very low,
Occupancy rate, not
I do
vacancy.
think these
Obviously.
numbers in the development report are very telling that we have a lot that have been approved and have not yet been constructed.
That's true.
And I
Right.
think that is something to consider,
It
that
is.
Right.
while this corridor might be supported in Envision Franklin for multifamily, that is a lot of units to not have been built
That's
yet.
a-
And what does
Yes.
that mean
It
if there
is.
are
It
more
is.
approvals in the future? So I do think all these things need to be discussed because this is an element that is constantly changing and growing. And it is concerning.
It's very concerning
And
to
there's
me.
been bankruptcies in that area too,
Yeah,
Yeah, I
because they
think
couldn't
that
get it developed.
so many.
True.
and we just keep,
What'd you say? I'm sorry.
Looking at, when you start looking at apartments versus single family and available land that you could actually put single family on, it's a pure surface area math equation. If you have, say, 5 acres, how many single family houses versus that same 5 acres where you can stack them 4 to 5 feet or 4 to 5 stories with, say, 45 on each. So, you're looking at a handful, even if they're on tiny lots and, cramming them in to fit that single family versus, 2 or 3 massive houses of apartments. And I think that's always going to be the struggle just because of the limited surface area that's buildable in the city limits.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
First of all, the only thing I want to add, I agree, I think sentiments change. The plan is awesome, sentiments change. But the other thing I would also say is that I agree with you that I think there are pieces that are in that conservation subdivision that are also difficult pieces of property. And so that 50%, I think what ends up happening is the 50% gets applied to land that can't be built anyway.
Exactly.
And then we're trying to do a bunch of things. So I think in some ways, we also need to look at what those parcels actually are and do we need to have a different application so we don't find ourselves constantly dealing with that? The only other thing I'm going to say is that 4 months in, this is my favorite conversation so far after 4 months. Like I've been waiting for this conversation, and I think this is really important, and I don't want to lose. I hear a lot of eagerness to get together to give up time for a retreat. So I hope that action item is captured, and the sooner rather than later. I'm all in on that, and I think you're hearing an eagerness to have this conversation. So thank you.
Good. Okay.
okay.
Anyone else? Okay.
Well, we'll continue forward past the fun stuff, just so we don't run past
Oh, no,
6,
you're-
because y'all have
you-
another conversation
you
to
will.
have. But towards the end of this, we do calculate the total acreage of the city land uses. As you can see, the vast majority being dedicated toward residential uses. This includes all of the different dwelling unit types, single family and non-single family.
composing 36% of town, commercial falling to 10, and then our institutional and recreational uses being 23%, and then vacant and agricultural land being 27%. So a significantly more evenly spread distribution as far as land uses go versus dwelling unit types. Here we have our population estimate breakdown for into the future, as well as just the estimates that we've had over the years. As you can see, just to pat ourselves on the back a little bit, the federal census data that we received was just 400 citizens less than what we calculated with the different housing types, occupancy rate, and household size averages. So we like to think that our calculations are seemingly pretty accurate. One note, during 2021, you'll see a large jump here that is not accounted for in the number change. That's because we did discover 217 units within our GIS layer that had been built but not recorded as far as land use type in the previous years. So these were built sometime between 2016, 2017, and now. Had received their CO, were finished construction, but our coding system was not updated with them. So we added those 217 units in. That added approximately 600 or 700 extra people that should have been counted for previously across the different years. But now that we know that that's there, we added them into the total City of Franklin population estimate, but kept the number change without those percentages or without those units, just so it didn't throw off the percentages drastically. So we are able to keep a relatively accurate percent change and number change year to year, but update the total population to be as accurate as possible. With that, it did ultimately change our estimates for 2030 and 2040, but we are still looking at roughly, theoretically, 21,000 people per decade added to the overall city population, and that just comes from the average estimate growth over the last 20 years.
Not based on land area available.
No.
And that's a good point that you just made, is we've been growing about 2,000 people every year for the past 20 years.
That's correct.
Wow. Will there be a special census again in the next, 4 years like you've done in the past?
Yeah, I believe those, every 4 years. I'm not sure when those actually get decided when they're happening.
We'll do a budget.
We'll do a budget.
Give more money? Gotta get the money.
Again, this residential developments location map, as you can see, they are spread throughout across, but, a lot of new developments and more recent developments here on the eastern side of the city and on the southern portion of the city. As far as non-residential developments, really you can see a trend of them happening right along the 65 corridor, with a few smaller ones sort of scattered throughout, but the vast majority of the larger ones being here near I-65. And if you want to see, those land uses that we calculate the acreage based upon, there is a land use map here at the very end. The parcel lines get things a little bit muddy, but if you zoom in a lot, those kind of go away. So if you want to take a closer look on the different land uses, we have this in the report, but this is also online on our interactive GIS map. So, and then just, the team and the folks that helped put this together this year and every year. So that is everything that's within the development report. It doesn't change too much year to year as far as what we include in it. But it does give a nice little breakdown of everything that happened in the previous year. So if anybody has any final questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, I'll turn it over and you can all discuss joint conceptual workshop.
Any final questions?
I've got a
Alderman?
quick one, if I could.
Yes, ma'am.
Basically, it has to do with how do we distribute this report? Who gets this report? Is this more for,
So it is available online, on the City of Franklin webpage in the planning department. So it is available for everybody. We do, point people towards it as a resource, for anybody that's interested. It is in the documents online section of the planning webpage. So, it is available for everybody.
Okay. Yes, Alderman Potts.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to follow up on Mayor Moore's comment initially about getting comparable cities that we could look at, or a city at the time. If there was a list of cities that you guys are able to lay out in front of us, I think that would be of benefit right now, instead of just providing one or two. I think we need, I would say 5 to 10, if possible.
Okay.
nobody's like Franklin?
Okay.
Roger,
Thank you, Eric.
Roger, if we have the retreat, I guess I'm sitting here trying to, what are we expecting to get out of that? I mean, we should have, are we looking for a goal on the number of apartments? If you ask Alderman Peterson or myself, and we go back a long ways, the issue of growth was here in 88. It was here in 89. It was here in 90. It's been here all along, and I guess we maybe said the same thing. All wrung our hands and said, oh, what are we going to do? And the apartments are market driven. They're not building those things just because they want to build them. They're building them because they're economically feasible, and that's what people are wanting, and that's what we see in surveys, that they're wanting a walkable. They don't want to go to a single-family house. They don't want the yard to cut. They don't want the grass to cut. They don't want the maintenance outside. And we sit here and say, I don't mind looking at if there's a percentage or a quota or something other, but just to sit and say we need a retreat to determine what we're going to do and not get a great deal accomplished out of the retreat, or not know what the goal is in the retreat, and I don't know what it is sitting here right now. It needs to be determined better than what we're sitting here saying that's there. And every time we come up with a single-family house, there's somebody complaining about that when we sit up on the board and sit here with you guys, the same thing. Oh, the yard's too small, or it's set too close to the road, or we want it turned sideways or something other. So if you're not going to, if you want to set a quota, set it and stick with it, and see what happens. But that issue as far as growth has been going on, and because the reason I looked at it was I was looking at the 1980 census of 12,000 people versus 80-something thousand now, and if you really go back, the percentages were greater in growth early, which it would be because you've got less people, but that's 100% growth in 10 years from 80 to 90, looks like. So sit back, if we're going to attend, know what we're kind of looking for to get out of this before we just say, let's go to another meeting. I can go to another meeting in about an hour if I want to.
Well, Clyde, I'm all for you. How about this? And we can all exchange emails. Well, I'll put it out there for you because I've been yelling about this for a while. And you're absolutely right. And I keep hearing people say the market. But how about this? And I'll just offer this for you guys. We are stewards of our community. I believe that's why I sit here, because believe me, we don't make the big bucks like you guys do, okay? So let me say this for you. The market does not set the vision for the city of Franklin. Ask the people that live in Brentwood. Ask developers what they propose when they go before the Planning Commission in Brentwood. Ask the people what they propose when they go before the commissioners in Brentwood. And I'm not saying we're Brentwood. I don't want to be Brentwood. That's why I live in Franklin. I'm just saying that what I would like to see, and this is just one person saying from our meeting, that we as a group of commissioners and aldermen say that in the city of Franklin, our goal is to have 50% single family, 50% apartments, or whatever that is. But that's our goal when we come, not to come there and sit, because I hate meetings too, but that we set a goal of what we'd like to accomplish, so that when we look at Envision Franklin, when we come to that meeting, when we're looking at the corridor, we look at how much land we have, that is what we shoot for, so that we don't, it is not, by the way, we can say no, by the way. We don't have to say yes to every developer that comes in here. We have the right to say no if it does not fit our parameters, if it does not fit our goal. We can set that as a goal. And so that's what I would like to see. If we want this to be a primarily single family, if we want it to be 60%, we can set that as a goal. And so, and if that's not what we want, hey, that's what we decide. I'm just one vote. But that's how I feel about it. So I just say, I think we forget sometimes we can say no. As long as, according to our legal counsel, as long as we have a valid reason for saying no, we can say no. But that's what I would like to see, that we set some parameters for that.
Well, that's what's coming out of the meeting then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
If we set it at 60%, 50%, whatever you want to set it at. But to set it at 50 and it comes out back at 75 and 25, that we haven't accomplished much.
That's exactly right.
I think too, looking at those other cities that might be somewhat in the ballpark of Franklin are very important too, because we can take a look at those and be like, okay, what is the vision of Franklin? Where do people that are already residents here, what environment do they want to live in? And how do those percentages really affect what happens to that city? And not just, visually, but and different metrics. Anything that we can get data on, I think the better.
Well, if you set your areas based on what it will handle and the location,
Right.
and then just wait and you hold yourself to that, it will work out. We may get a big bump of apartments, from here down to 840. That's going to happen. That's the area they should be in. But once you spread out east and west over a period of time, if we don't allow anything else out that way, it'll eventually catch back up. But you got to be prepared for the first hit of apartments that's going to come.
Okay.
And when we talk about single family, we still forget that most of the single family is going to be the price points are going to be so high that there's a whole segment of the community or people who would like to buy homes here who still cannot. So we talk about the single family. We want more. So we want more $800,000 to $1 million homes. So it's just a conundrum. It's really something we're going to have to sit and talk about because, yes, I think we have too many apartments, but at the same time, we don't have enough workforce housing. We don't take that. We're into this and thinking how we need to halt the apartment growth where we're not really getting real conscious and serious about the workforce and more affordable housing. So that's something we need to think about, even though we have a housing commission and we have our BOMA that has really been working and trying to make some things happen, but we need to think more about that as well.
Yeah, okay.
Need to talk to the legislature.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, that's good. The second item that we had on our agenda for tonight was to discuss Franklin Grove PUD, and the applicant had requested a deferral until the March joint conceptual meeting, so that item will not be discussed tonight. Item number 3 is the continued discussion of the joint conceptual workshop purpose and feedback. So with that, Emily, I'll let Emily lead off.
Sure. Before we get into that, I just have a couple quick things. First of all, even though he's left, I'd really like to thank Eric for his work in the development report. He does a wonderful job with that.
Yes, he did.
And he is
Amen.
very on top of finding inaccuracies and making sure it's all correct information. So we really appreciate his tedious work on it. Also, as an announcement, some of you know Elaine Ellis, our administrative assistant for the last several years. Tonight is actually today's her last day with us. She's going to be moving on, and so she's not staying through Planning Commission, but she is here up until 7 o'clock. So after this meeting, if you see her down in the training room or anything, please wish her well. We'll miss her a lot, so I wanted to let you all know that. And then for this item, I'm not going to speak as we went through a lot of the issues last month and you already heard it. But Vernon is going to share just a quick bit of information with you, and then we will let you speak on this time.
Okay.
Thank you, and good evening again. I'd like to invite up to the table the chairman and vice chairman of our Development Services Advisory Commission, Dwight Kaiser and Alan Thompson. And a few months ago, Eric Stuckey and Mayor Moore charged the commission to look at our plan development entitlement process. And part of that process is we're breaking it down and have been talking about it over the last few months, is the joint conceptual workshop. And we'd like to talk, share some of the thoughts with you this evening and ideas, and get some feedback. And as Emily mentioned, I'm gonna present those very quickly. But I also will say that what we're talking about here, about the joint conceptual workshop, really goes hand in glove with what you've talked about, how we provide guidance to the people investing in our community. And the sooner we do that, the clearer expectations we have and the more timeliness we can make it for somebody wanting to make an investment. We all hear it. Time is money and things are pretty expensive these days. So kind of keep that in mind, because as we go forward, we're not gonna land on any final decisions tonight. That's not the goal. It's to share the ideas. And as we know, the purpose of the joint conceptual workshop is to give an applicant an opportunity to talk about their project briefly. Oh, I know, I talk, thank you, I talk so softly. No, thank you, Mayor. And then for staff to provide, initial comments about, whether it has an opportunity to comply with our master plans and technical street standards. And then for aldermen and planning commissioners to ask questions and provide very important feedback. And the challenges we've identified recently, and we've talked about the growth, the 2,000-3,000 people moving to the community annually. I came here a little over 15 years ago, and the community was 43,000. It's over 85,000 now. It's the volume of applications that come in monthly. They fluctuate. This month is a great example. We would have had one before you, but we don't have any more. But some months we're just overwhelmed. And that leaves little time for feedback when we have multiple projects, too many that can fit in this hour and a half. And then all projects aren't created equal. The project size, the type, the location might require more time than another. And we've tried to parcel out times of prescribed so many minutes for the presentation, and then staff comments, and then all your comments. And it's not real productive, and that's what we've heard from development professionals. And actually, this coming Wednesday, we're going to have another meeting with the design professionals and developers to share what we're sharing with you tonight, to get another level of input that we've already discussed so far. So what are the reasons that we're not getting as meaningful material feedback that we should be giving? And it's, again, the volume of applications, and then the presentation, the format time, that allotted time is not sufficient because, again, as I mentioned, not all projects are created equal. The other part of this discussion, when we turn it over to you, is really what information do you need from staff during the joint conceptual workshop? Because we can better prepare. What we've talked about with the the Development Professional Advisory Commission is that typically when the items start moving through the process and there's concerns raised either by residents or y'all, it relates to traffic connectivity or stormwater. And now we're getting to multifamily the number of multifamily units being built. And I would offer that the traffic, and the commission talked about this, connectivity and stormwater are all technically related to compliance with our standards. And staff and the planning commission, that's their primary charge, is to look at the technical aspects. And I share that with you as development plans move on to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, for the more final decision, more political decision. So what were some of the potential solutions? And again, I'm going to review these quickly, just as ideas. And during our meetings, a couple of the commissioners had mentioned it'd be great if we had this with everybody in person. Matt is the alderman's representative to the commission, and we've had great dialogue. So one solution, because of the volume, is perhaps have a standing second meeting in the month when the volume is such that we could have it, and if we need it, fine. If not, we don't. Another meeting that gets, that gets into our schedules. Create a decision-making matrix that allows the planning director to assign presentation times based on certain factors. And for example, how many modifications of standards might a project be asking for? What's the size, the type, the location, perhaps environmental impacts? Some things like that, that if we do have larger developments, more impacting, that they are afforded sufficient time to get feedback from you all. The other one is distinguish which projects should come to the joint conceptual workshop. Again, create a matrix that allows us to do that, and we can report all of the projects to you. But because when volumes are high, do all projects need to come, particularly those that maybe don't have any modifications of standards, or very little, or they're small? Do we need to have to spend the time? And we're talking about the joint conceptual workshop, not the neighborhood meetings. Those would still be had an opportunity for you all to attend. Also, perhaps the ward aldermen should weigh in on whether there's a project and there's not enough sufficient time that they can help us decide whether they feel it should come before you. Those are some of the ideas that have been tossed around thus far. Dwight and Alan have been part of that, very much appreciated, and Matt as well. We're open to ideas, and Dwight, I don't know if you have any other comments. If you do, I have to remind you to turn on the green light. Yeah. All right, Alan. Thank you. So, just some reaction and thoughts.
As Vernon said, we've watched, and we're here tonight to watch as well. I'm trying to dive in from my own personal interest in the charge of the Planning Commission and the charge of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. And is there any duplicity in what might be going on that could be circumvented, just from a review and a recommendation standpoint? My understanding is that the Planning Commission is really technically oriented and advises the city and works with the planning staff on making sure that submittals that come before this body are technically compliant with the requirements of the city, from a development, design, grading, drainage, things of that nature. If that's the case, will the Board of Mayor and Aldermen take that review and decision-making, the decision that was made by the Planning Commission, and count on using that and deal with more of the political aspects, perhaps, of the project, as opposed to reinventing some of the technical review process that's already gone in the past? again, I'm just asking questions and looking at things. Is there a way to save time? And if everyone, as I've used the term, and believe me, I sometimes speak out of my mouth, but I am, everyone stay in their own lane and do what the project needs to be, and perhaps we can get more efficiency as we pass it through the review process. I'm not saying that is what we should be looking at, but this is one of the things that I'm in particular looking into. Some of the other aspects, from a design standpoint and people that work with those developers, it's incredibly important to get feedback from the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and even the Planning Commission. Designers are not allowed to approach the planning commissioners to present projects like we were back in the old days. The Joint Conceptual Workshop, quite honestly, is the only venue that we have. And on some of these projects where you might be talking, 700 units or 700 acres, trying to get your point across and get meaningful feedback from 15 to 30 minutes that might be allotted in any one of these meetings, it's just not enough time for that particular effort. So again, going back to what Vernon was saying, is there a matrix based on size, complexity, things of that nature, that we can start sifting out some of the number 4 gravel and retaining the number 8 gravel for more scrutiny? I mean, that's just thoughts that we're talking about. And I'll just shut up from there. Alan?
I would agree that there are projects that come before this joint conceptual workshop that need a whole lot more than 15 minutes to be presented. And there's some that maybe don't need that much.
True.
And so some kind of guidance that would, matrix that would help you filter out some and allocate more time for others. And also, I think more feedback from staff on some of the projects that are coming through would be helpful. I think I applaud the board, that they're here. That's awfully important, and, I know I've struggled with attendance some in the past, but this is where we're supposed to be giving guidance, and shame on us if we're not giving some guidance. Then we're up here getting ready to vote, and we're saying, well, we wish you had done that. Well, why weren't you here to tell them that at the joint conceptual workshop? So I think that's where we can flush a lot of things out.
Back in the old days, it wasn't unusual to negotiate at the podium. I think we all are glad that those days are past, but we are starting to see it creep back in some cases. And I think that's something that we definitely need to put our finger on and stop. We have to figure out how to make the process right again.
I think one of the best things ever put forward is the design professional regular meeting. That I've attended several of them. I know you guys have too, and the door's open to make it more efficient, and for Vernon and them staff to present it to the board and Mayor and Alderman, the Planning Commission to support the process.
Yes, sir.
I think you're doing a great job. Thank
I
you.
have a comment. I'm really happy to see the decision-making matrix, because I think we need to get away from the one-size-fits-all and allow planning to be the professionals that they are, because only they really know what this entails, what it's about, and we really have kept them in a box and constrained them, and then we've ended up with unintended consequences so many times. And I'd really like to see them be able to be a little bit more empowered to make those decisions on how long do they need, is this really necessary, is it not, and trust their professional opinions.
I think one of the things that I've seen, and also this comes also as a perspective as being an architect, being on both sides of a joint conceptual, is when we have a project that comes in and there's certain items that that presenter is putting before us, because they know that that will probably be an item that comes up in planning commission.
Right.
You know, that's their next step. And sometimes if these items include kind of more of these hot button topics, I've seen the whole kind of joint workshop derail into a discussion. And while there's a lot to be discussed and a lot of interest in these, it certainly is not helping the applicant. And so this kind of just dead ends into a period of non-decision, and for the applicant, that's really not fair. They're getting no feedback about the issues that will be coming back in front of us. They might have mentioned it. Maybe we're hitting on a topic that, their units aren't going to be affordable, the density, but we're talking about general Franklin things and not necessarily their project, because it will come back. And unless we address their items in their context, it's of no use for us to discuss larger things when maybe, while those discussions are valid, completely valid, it might just be more cognizant of showing respect to the items that we'll definitely see. Because it's, in some ways, when you see that come through and you saw the same issues and the same items that the staff brought up in the joint conceptual, and they weren't talked to maybe as poignantly as they should have been, you see it come back in the joint workshop, and for the client presenting, sometimes all of a sudden we did have issues with a lot of these, and they did relate to some of those hot button topics. And then when, you know, a lot of times they will have no issue working with us and modifying their plans if they knew that's something that maybe we weren't going to allow certain modifications. So just being cognizant about what they're trying to accomplish and that time allocation if they have 15 minutes to speak to the project.
So how do you propose we handle that? How do we solve that?
It's tough. It's a tough one too. I think in part it might just be the planning commissioners and the BOMA members just being a little bit more cognizant of just really trying to kind of stay on track with the project. And again, maybe some of the matrices can probably help, because if we know that there's a, if planning knows that there's a project that might be a little contentious in some ways, just a reminder that can help. Or maybe there are some items that we know will require more discussion, so maybe that project gets a little bit more time.
I think we could ask the developers coming before us, list your top 2 areas you want feedback on. And then start with that. Tell us up front, these are 2 areas of my project, whether it's the use, whether it's the size, whatever that is. This is what I want feedback on. And this is what I want to spend time on. And they do the presentation, and then if they have extra time, they can go into other aspects of their project, but they get the valuable feedback on what they feel is important to them. So come to us with an itinerary. They know, they live that project. They know, have a feeling for what they want from us, so that they can help guide us so we don't get derailed. And we don't focus on that aspect that's not that important to them. Because we're probably not going to be able to answer or provide all the feedback they want, but if we can hit their top 2, that's much more effective than it is today.
Because one of the things I was going to say is because a lot of the time that is allotted is spent on showing us, this is what our floor plans look like, this is what our landscape looks like. And to be honest with you, I could care less. I mean, that doesn't really make me vote for your project. I'm looking at just what Vernon talked about, traffic, connectivity, stormwater. So yeah, so don't waste a lot. I would say to developers, don't waste a lot of time on the pretty things.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So I love that idea. And one of the things I always say is, what is the problem we're trying to solve with this? In this session, as I understand it, the primary goal is feedback to the applicant with a priority on the planning commission. Because to your point, we may have already met once, twice, 5 times with the applicant. We probably have had multiple conversations. So we're kind of coming into this session having already sort of given some feedback. So I always want to defer to the planning commission, because you need to hear that, I think, as a priority versus what you probably have already heard from us. What I love getting out of this session is I like hearing, because I mean the perspective around this room is so unique and different in every one of these seats, and definitely not how I think about a lot of things. And so I actually appreciate the dialogue on how I should be thinking about something, or maybe something I should be seeing, or giving me perspective on something that I don't quite understand or have a question on. But the idea of picking those things, 'cause I think sometimes it's a love fest. I mean, we've been in a couple now where, people walk in, it's like, oh, that's so fantastic, great. And then 2 months later, actually, there's something not quite right. So I think to be able to narrow down to key issues on it, I do like the idea of perhaps just bouncing it off the ward alderman. Hey, what do you think is going to be some of the biggest issues? And let's just address those. Go ugly early a little bit, if you will, which I know is hard to do. It's hard to walk into a room and say, here's what's wrong with here's what could be wrong with my project. But I think you almost kind of have to in some ways. But I do like that idea, and I think to prioritize the time to make sure that they're hearing your voices first and then are being able to add on. I don't know.
If I could, one of the
Yes, Dwight.
obviously key objectives is to review PUDs. But the trouble is not one size fits all. I was part of the original West Haven entitlement. Could you imagine taking West Haven through and asking for their 2 most contentious points and then taking that through the review and entitlement process? It just wouldn't happen. That process was a week-long charrette and multiple meetings. And I'm not saying that there's more out there, but some of these more complex, larger projects, and everything is getting more complex because it's not just laying out lots or a building footprint. Now we're getting into horizontal and vertical mixed use and things of that nature. And so from a design standpoint and input standpoint, much more complex than we can adequately review in a 15 or even an hour-long meeting. That's what we have to figure out how to deal with.
Yeah, and to add to that, I would like to get the general feeling
Right.
of a second meeting, if need be. And the reason behind that, we wrestled and wrestled with the process during our meeting. And, we realized the process is not what's broke. It's the volume that the process is getting. Now, you certainly could make your meetings more efficient, but with as much as coming into the city right now, I don't think you can make it that efficient. And as Dwight said, getting feedback, it's very essential. And we're asking the planning commission to make a pretty big decision on a very limited window of input. And so, and I know you guys probably meet to death, but I think it would help us, going back to our commission, if we had a general understanding of if that was what your feeling would be, should we need a second meeting?
I'd say no.
I wrote that down when I first saw that. I'm sorry, I won't be in favor of that.
No, I'm not in favor
If
of
we
that,
can
I'll tell you
meet
that.
earlier, or,
You can
you know,
come to a second meeting, but
yeah.
I'm not in favor of having two
I
meetings.
won't be either.
No,
I
you
mean,
can
I'm
come to a
meeting
second.
every day as it is. I mean,
Nah.
that's just too much.
Mr. Chair, over here.
Yes.
A couple, real quick. I think having the applicants have a set presentation kind of standard where we as a staff kind of force, and I think I've emailed you, Dwight, on this, and kind of force the applicant into where we want this, where the decision points, or the talking points. Again, we sit here and we hear all the great things, and we're 7 or 8 minutes in, and we've just been told, about the trails, and that's great. We love trails, but let's get in, have a minute, show us, send something beforehand with all the great things about it. I know that we're giving the items ahead of time, but maybe the month before or a couple weeks before, we get a 1-page, 2-page kind of overview with all the great things and how it's going to be fantastic for the community, kind of a sales sheet, if you will, of the great things about it. Not to diminish the value of that, but just our time is limited, and they just force the applicants into a structured presentation that achieves, envision Franklin issues or feedback on how it matches Envision Franklin, feedback on how it matches zoning. And then we give you there's a specific question at the end for us. So we have to answer the question. We don't just get to say what's on our mind. What do you want to hear? And ask and put it on paper. If staff has something they want to hear, is there something specific? Just like Matt said, kind of get dirty earlier, and let us answer the question. Let us give you the feedback you're looking for. If you If the applicants just give us the great things about it and expect us in this meeting to figure out the issues on point and give you feedback without getting some direction, I think this will continue to be what it is unless we're given a roadmap to the issue that you want feedback on. So I think just being really specific and cutting a lot of fluff, we could, and maybe doing the matrix and having staff decide what comes in. But what will happen is undoubtedly, no offense to staff will make a decision that half of us don't agree with, and it will be, and we'll be back to where we are now. So I just think we should, if we funnel it in to something very specific in how you present, and then have us, just ask us the questions you want us, or give us the direction of the feedback you want. I mean, the 4 or 5 I've been in, I've not been asked specifically, maybe once or twice, but I want feedback just on this. And maybe the parking for the studio was the last one I specifically remember, like, we just want to hear about the parking. Well, I'm sure the applicant got great feedback on that because they asked.
Yeah. I think it's got to be balanced between, one, what kind of feedback you as a presenter want from us, but at the same time, too, we went through as we kind of polished this process over the years, there was a time some 3, 5, 7 years ago where we would listen to a presentation, we would nod and say, yeah, that, okay. And then a month later, we'd all vote against it. And so the concern from the development community was, if you got a problem with my project, tell me, so that I don't spend another month on engineering costs and surveying costs and development costs if you're not going to support my project, 30 days from now.
That's great.
So.
Absolutely. I think you could narrow it down where the applicant's not spending a ton of money just by authenticating a concept plan instead of having to go to full construction documents for a full submittal. But in some of our recent conferences that we've had with Amy and all, it was great. And so we get a good read based on the regs and what's allowable and the setbacks and things like that. So staff is doing that to us to that extent to allow us to make decisions on whether we want to, go under contract with a car wash or a restaurant or somebody like that wants to come forward. But the kind of the burn side of that is actually, with all that sounds great, for go on in and do full, especially on a by right site, full construction documents, and it comes in, and then it gets rejected, and then you get all that time, and you get some issues there. So I think that's the challenge for the developers and the designers to see if they can vet that process out a little better. What do you think, Bernie?
Thank you for the feedback. That's exactly what we want, and we're going to evolve this further. But one of the points that came up that I had a note and want to share with you, that we expect more on our development plans, those plans that come before you. And the development community will tell you, yes, they take more time, they cost more money, but when we go through the process, we know it can be built. And a concept plan, a bubble diagram, doesn't do that. And that's how we've evolved as a community. So there's more predictability, but when we get to as Mr. Frank said, when we get to that decision point after that investment of time and money has been made, it's a bigger sting when it gets, rejected.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Roger,
Yes.
there was a comment, this has been interesting, there was a comment a while ago. And I'm wondering how you disagree with staff. Okay? If they followed what we have passed legislatively, and they come before the board and they say they're okay with this, they're okay with this, their setbacks are correct, their yard size is correct, they're within 10,000 square feet of yard space, how do you disagree with them? That's where it is right there. Now, if I disagree that it's 10,000 square feet, it's not a big enough yard, I need to disagree with the ordinance itself. I
Yeah.
don't need to disagree with the staff making the presentation, because the question I usually ask on any development is there anything this developer has not abided by? Is there anything on here? Is there something here that he has not abided by? And you're gonna have it, in the 30 minutes to 45 minutes, loaded up, because the chairs are out there. But is there anything that he has not done that you've asked him to do? And if I get an answer no to that, there's nothing he hasn't done, then I'm pretty well, I think, obligated to support that, even though it may not necessarily be the most popular thing coming through from the audience sitting right out here.
Let me say though, there's a lot of difference between something that's already zoned a certain way, and if they fulfill all of the requirements, I remember from being on the planning commission for a long time, you have to have a reason not to approve it. But what we're seeing on the board of mayor and aldermen is generally not what I'm just talking about there, where it already has the zoning and it has said that they've satisfied all of it. So much of what we look at is rezoning. And that is a totally different thing from somebody filling in the requirements.
Well,
Okay.
I'm just saying.
Okay, we
Go
could
ahead.
we could
Yeah, we
talk
could talk
another
about that for
hour
a long
on
time.
on
Yeah, we
this,
can-
and we don't have
stop.
that hour, so. If appropriate, I mean, we could continue some more discussion.
Oh,
at our
we
next
will.
meeting.
Yeah, we'll talk with we'll be meeting with the design professionals developer group next Wednesday.
Okay.
We'll meet with the commission some more. This is, the joint conceptual workshop is one part of the entitlement process. So we're just honing in on this, and it will take some time. We had anticipated it would.
Right.
Thank you again for
Oh,
the
great.
feedback.
Good discussion. Thanks, everybody. Okay.